What I'm going to be showing you is how to sew your blocks together with sashing in between. So when there are pieces of fabric sewn in between your blocks, that's called sashing. What I have right here are four pieces of sashing that are cut. These are 10.5 inches by 2.5 inches, and these are cut to fit the size of the blocks. These blocks are 10.5 by 10.5 square, so that they will be a finished size of 10 inches by 10 inches square. This is a layout of how the sashing will be between the blocks. The top row will have the hand block, the pi digits block, and the herring block. The bottom row will have the tie-dye block, the Kandinsky circle block, and the Fibonacci circle block. After the vertical sashing is sewn, then we will put a horizontal row of sashing between those two, and I'll show you how to do that. I find it really useful to lay out my blocks and the sashing and then snap a photo of it so that I can remember what order that those are supposed to be in. Another option is to get an old sheet that you haven't, that you're not using, and to actually pin the blocks to the sheet, and then when you need to put it away, you can either roll it up or hang it somewhere. Alright, my next step is that I'm going to start sewing the blocks to the sashing using a 1/4 inch seam, a 2/8 inch seam. Okay, now I'm ready to sew the 1/4 inch seam with the sashing and the first block with right sides together. I've changed back to a foot, that on the right edge here, the distance between the needle and this right edge is a 1/4 inch or 2/8 of an inch. If you need help with figuring out what the seam distance is to make a 1/4 of an inch, and you're working on this project with me, get a hold of me and I can take a look at your machine and help you out with that. Alright, as I start to sew, notice that I don't backstitch. That's because these seams cross over at every point, and so we just start at the very end and we don't back tack, we don't backstitch. I'm using a 1.8 millimeter length stitch. This is what I use standard for all my quilting stitching and piecing stitching. And I'm just holding these two together at the very end, making sure that those stay together at the end. With the cottons that we're using, there's usually some give, and so if you need to, sometimes you can pull the top or pull the bottom a little bit to make sure that those meet up the bottom. This is especially useful when you're matching up rows and you need the pieces to meet. If you're really far off, you shouldn't be, and that's a problem to investigate before you go further. I'm going to trim the threads. See on this side, nice straight seam, not back tacked. There we see. At this point, I'm going to go ahead before I press these seams and just put the whole row together. I like to wait to do that till I have the whole row together. Definitely want to press seams before I try to join one row to the next. Definitely want to press seams before you do that. Don't try sewing one of these pieces to another without pressing those seams. Okay, so now I have the squares sewn together with the sashing in between. The sashing is vertical. The squares sewn together. Let's take a look at the back. This is not yet pressed. And you see there's no back tacking on those. Now when we press, we're going to press the seams. So the seams go in toward the sashing. In toward the sashing. The sashing generally will be darker than the blocks, as in this case. The sashing is black. So that way you won't see the seams bleed through. If it was this way, then you would see the seams through the back. When you press the seams this way, there's nothing to see through. Nothing to see through. Okay, so I just got done pressing with the iron. You can see the seams lying nice and flat, pointing inside toward the sashing, inside toward the sashing. I press on the back of the fabric, turning it over. And here we have our row of 3 blocks. Very nice. Now I just need to put this row together, and then we'll be ready to attach top row to the bottom row with a horizontal line sashing. Stay tuned. All right, so now I have 2 rows sewn with the sashing in between, and a lot of times I'll have a little bit of time to sit down and do a row, do a couple of rows, but it's just too much to sew those together. And a lot of times I don't like to start sewing rows together until I have all the rows actually completed with the sashing done. So here is a good trick for you for how to store those. If you fold them up, then it creates a problem with all the pressing that you've done. This is what you do. A hanger. Not a wire hanger. One that you can hang pants on without having a problem. But you can hang those on there. You can also do that with strips that you might have. So those are nice and pressed and straight. Hang them up on a hanger. Don't just fold those up. Put them in your closet. They don't take a lot of space. Okay, so both rows are sewn, and you'll notice that they line up very nicely. And you want to make sure that all of your rows on your larger quilts are going to line up nicely like that. If they don't, stop. Don't go any further. Check with me. Okay. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to take a horizontal row of our sashing. Okay. So For this one, it's very short. There we go. Now the key to this is you start your sewing not from the end, you start it from the middle. It's okay to start and stop a seam. You just want to overlap it by ½ inch or so. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sew this on to this side first, and I'll show you when I'm done that I've overlapped the seams. Furthermore, when I sew, this side is going to be on the bottom, this side is going to be on the top, so that when I sew over these seams, I can keep them going the right direction when I don't flip them over as I'm sewing over those. If I put this on the bottom, then those seams kind of get flipped over on the bottom. Okay, so this is right after I've sewn on the entire row of sashing. You can see I have an equal length at each end. I'm not going to trim that off right now. Let's wait until we have all those on and trim those on last. You can see right here where I have this little thread. This is where I joined up and stitched over that seam. That way I don't have to backtrack. I just stitch over that seam to start the seam again. You can do that anytime you want. As many times you want along that seam, just as long as it joins that seam. Now, when I press, once again, the seam is going to go toward the sashing, away from the squares, toward the sashing. I'm going to press, and then we'll get to the next step. Okay, so now I've pressed the sashing, and you are going to want to press the sashing down before doing this next step. Very, very important. We've pressed this long seam down toward the sashing. Kind of interesting to look at the back of the quilt. See all the seams, looking good. Okay, and then here's the next row, right side up, that we want to sew to the bottom of this row of sashing. All right. Now this next step, very important. This is going to make your life so much easier, I promise, based on what I saw from the quilts last year. All right, so this is how you line up one row to another. And this is why you want to wait and have all your rows sewn and make sure they're all the correct length before you do this next step. Okay, so check this out. Just lay this row on top of the other row. Like what we have here. It lines up on this end. And it's, let's see, a little bit hard to do this one-handed. Lines up on this end, and this is the best part. If we turn this over, we see that the sashing lines up, and that's how we know that we're lined up top to bottom. Okay, we are lined up. There we go, nice and flat. We're lined up here, and we are lined up here. Okay, so what we're going to do at this point is we're going to place pins. Okay, we're going to place pins all the way along here, all the way along. And we are not going to stretch and pull. We're just going to make sure that we go all the way along. Where do we start sewing? We start sewing in the middle of the row.
we sew one direction, and then we start and we sew in segments along the other direction so that we don't end up with a push-pulling situation. And we absolutely don't push-pull on the ends. Okay? And that's how you get rows that line up, match up. Awesome.